Hello, fellow homebrewers. JP here, and I want to introduce to you the brand new Brew Built X1 Conical Series available at More Beer. More Beer sells the highest standard in homebrewing equipment, and the Brew Built Conicals are just that. They're made from mirror-polished 304 stainless steel, and they come with loads of features that you and I have been looking for. They have a full 2-inch bottom dump valve, which will eliminate your clogging issues, while the sturdy base includes 4 reinforced legs, just like those big pro tanks do. More Beer also carries the Brew Built line of options and add-ons like casters, pressure kits, and even external glycol chillers. So you can find out more about the new Brew Built X1 Conical Unitanks by going over to morebeer.com for detailed videos on the entire line of Brew Built Conicals. You can trust Brew Built with your next fermentation, and you can trust More Beer to find the right conical for you. Brew Built at morebeer.com.
Great beer is about drinkability. Doesn't matter the style.
You guys are like walking beer Wikipedia. That's the first time that you've ever accepted me as a person.
Or you have a fermentation in your gut.
I'm jet propelled at all times.
How many guys do you think that you have the privilege to slap?
Somebody who's never tasted a commercial example, and this is how you know everything about this beer? Please, you don't.
I think that's bullshit.
I think it's bullshit too.
Wow. Are you guys going to arm wrestle?
No.
They're going to teabag fight instead.
Yeah. You heard of Junkyard Wars?
Can I get another high five, Beavis?
Now, live from the Brewing Network studios in Northern California, this is the radio program for home brewers, craft brewers, beer lovers, and beer geeks. It's your only source for live beer radio that brings expert brewers together with, well, expert drinkers. This is the radio program with a head on it. This is The Session.
Hey, welcome everybody. It's another episode of The Session. And we have a doozy for you. I have a bunch of corked and caged bottles in front of me from a little brewery called Alesong. And they're up in Eugene, Oregon. And I say little brewery smiling because their reputation definitely precedes them, especially down here in the Bay Area. Brian and Doug, welcome to the show, boys.
Thanks. Cheers.
Cheers right back at you. I was reading a little bit on your website and looking a little bit at the video that looks recently produced. That's on your website. It's very good. The funny thing, quote unquote funny thing about the pandemic and the world we live in today is you can sort of now tell when media has been produced because there's masks. Yeah, totally. So I'm like, oh, okay, there we go. I can tell this is at least within the last 18 months. So, and I don't know why. I think that's.
I know it's one of those things too that you don't like notice it until it's too late, and you're like, totally should have taken my mask off.
No, I personally, I'm of two minds of it because like. Either I like seeing it, and I've been saying since this whole lockdown started, at least in California, that this is exactly the stuff I want to see on people's social media. I want to see the staff wearing masks. I want to see all this kind of stuff because it makes me feel comfortable. But then it is also like doing a political joke on a TV show where it sort of dates your TV show maybe a little bit. So I could see why you'd be like, oh, I should have taken it off. But I think that's just what it is now, at least for the next few years. But my tasting glass is usually my Mai Tai glass.
Nice.
But I'm drinking out of this really cool wine glass because I was inspired by all the glasses in your video. You guys have the very,
we like these, the Tekus, for all of our beers.
Is that what they're called, the Tekus?
Yeah.
This is not a Teku. So yours are a little more shallow and a little more angular.
Yeah, and it's got the angle on it, so it's theoretically that burst the aroma into your nose, But I think stemware is a great place to start.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, I still have my Mai Tai glass because I really do like trying barrel-aged beers and sour beers and beers with Brett in different glassware because I'm sort of like, I don't know, to me, like different glassware does bring out different aromatics and different flavors, and I know that's not necessarily like a Pulitzer Prize winning, journalistic thought, but to me it's very interesting, and that's part of why I gravitate towards beers that you guys produce and beers like this in general, is because you can play around with it even after it's packaged. right? You can play around with it at home. You can try different glasses. Mine's apparently dirty, so excuse me. I'm going to do some bar work right now.
That's fine. I mean, we prefer our beer. I mean, we think it tastes best in the stemware, but we've definitely had it, you take it to a football game if you want. You drink it straight out of the bottle, or like Red Solo Cup is fine too, whatever you want to do.
Yeah. All right. I'll do that. If I had I would do it.
We're not snobs here.
No, you're not. Well, and I think that's the sort of myth of, let's just say a cork and caged beer, right? Where it's, oh, well, these guys must be snobberinos because they're barrel aging all their beer and they do these wild fermentations and they do these sour beers and Brett beers. But I don't really get that vibe at least from your website. And I don't really think that is necessarily the, accurate depiction, at least not anymore.
I mean, the bottom line is we want people to feel comfortable drinking these beers, right? It's like educational, and we want people to like be curious. And I think we've all had that experience in a wine tasting room where the wine server behind the bar is like, oh, you tasted this random thing that you've never actually tasted before in this wine, right? And they make you kind of feel like an idiot. And it's just like, we put our heart and soul into these beers, and they take a really long time, and we love them, and they're elevated to a point with cool packaging and what they need to be on the table at Thanksgiving or whatever. But at the same time, we want to be grounded and like your enjoyment is yours, right? It's like however you enjoy it is great.
Is that part of the packaging? Is that a consideration that goes into choosing your packaging? Because your packaging is very cool, but it is very subtle at the same time. It's not, flashy like some of these, canned, hazy IPAs can get with like, here's, iridescent hypercolor type labels that buzz and alert you whenever you open the can. But it is still sort of a classic feel. Do you sort of feel like you have to have a sort of subdued branding so it fits alongside a nice bottle of wine or something else? Or do you just generally like the aesthetic of that?
Yeah, I think it's both, but like really for us, it's about getting people to think about beer as something that can be, at Thanksgiving or whatever. You can take it to somebody's house and like, your aunt doesn't roll her eyes at you because you showed up with a 6-pack, right? It's like, oh, I brought something nice. It like is very food friendly, has some complexity to it. And part of that is the packaging. Part of it is like understanding, that you get more aroma out of a glass that has some shape to it. I mean, a lot of it is like, and my background comes a little bit more on the wine side, but the wine industry has done such a great job of educating consumers on things like, how you serve their wine. And the beer industry has been sort of dominated by a few giant companies for a long time that really didn't want you to taste their beer, right? It was about like, how cold can it be, and like how fast can you drink it?
Right. You can just say Russian River. It's fine. You can say it.
So Vinny was encouraging you to chug your beers out of a frozen shaker pint.
Yeah, don't store Pliny. I need you to pound it in the parking lot as soon as you buy it. Don't store this beer is basically what he's saying.
Twist in the neck, right?
That is true.
That line that we love to mingle between kind of like the beer. Obviously, we make beer, but we also love that wine experience of like, we have our tasting room out 20 miles south of town in wine country, and we operate a lot. Like, we love that experience with food and beverage and really kind of taking your time and slowing things down to really appreciate the things. Yeah. But the balance is like doing that, but not being pretentious about it. And that's what we try to do all the time. It's like, let's elevate beer. Let's have this really cool process. Let's teach everyone about it, but let's not be assholes about it at the same time.
Well, and how do you do that? Because, because you're right. You don't want to talk down to your customers. You don't want to assume that they either know more than they do or sort of chide them or embarrass them because they know less than they think they do. How do you find that, especially in wine country, like you guys are saying? There is that sort of like wine tasting room element that you want to get away from, but at the same time, it's you're still here to learn about the drink.
Well, a big piece for us, I think, is that it is, we're not trying to like put something in front of you and tell you what you should be tasting, right? Like, I think that Brian alluded to that, but like sometimes that's the most frustrating thing in a wine tasting room when they're like, oh, this was like green tobacco and forest floor, and you're like, wait a minute, what? Like,
yeah, I'm not drinking a pu'er tea. Like, what's going on?
and so you're kind of like, I didn't get any of those things. So like, am I an idiot? Like, do I not understand what's going on? And so for us, it's really about letting people experience it. We talk about the process. We talk about like the story behind the beers. We do a ton of stuff with like local fruit. We just released a beer last week that was co-fermented with Mirabelle plums grown literally 10 feet from our property. So it's like super local, and getting people to understand kind of like all the things that go into it, start to kind of see how you can pair this flavor or this acidity level with food and kind of put the experience together. But then it's like, what do you experience and what do you like? One of the things that I hate is when somebody tells you like what you should like, right? If you taste it and you're like, I'm not into that, it's like, okay, try something else. Like, you don't have to love XYZ hazy IPA or Imperial Stout or whatever it is that everybody else says is awesome. It's like, we'll give you something else to try.
Yeah, I like that. I like that approach for sure, because that is definitely me. I'm very, boxed in. I built this cage of emotions for myself about what I like in beer. And sometimes it does me a disservice, from going out. You're like, well, when I used to go out, where it's like, oh, there's nothing on the list I feel like I will enjoy. So then I'm just going to have a Dr. Pepper or whatever it is. You know what I mean?
That's the fallback. I like it.
Yeah. So, I mean, kudos to, for having a wide variety of different stuff. So you guys are primarily or solely barrel aging your beers, right?
100% barrel aging.
100%.
Yeah.
How did you get involved?
Well, I could say aged in some sort of wood. We have a handful of fooders as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Wood aged.
When did you guys open? How long have you been cranking out beers up there in Eugene?
we quit our day jobs in end of 2015, and then we all started December 15, and then we released our first beers in August of 16.
Yeah, summer of 16 at some point.
Summer of 16. Wow. Okay. And so you weren't doing day jobs and then doing this as like a, night shift kind of thing. You took the leap.
We committed. Yeah. For better or worse, we committed.
How did your families what did your family think about that? 'Cause you guys are brothers.
Yeah.
What?
I think our parents, I don't know, Doug can attest to this too, but I think our parents were happy that we were getting along.
Okay. All right.
The best was every time I'd call my grandma on the phone, she'd be like, "So have you got a real job yet?"
Ooh, yeah.
I was like, "Grandma, I have a real job."
Huge burn from grandma.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I had also so I lived in the Bay Area for a while and I had some real jobs, but before we started Alesong, I had sort of a quarter life crisis and I lived in Colombia, like South America, Colombia for 4 years. So I think my family had given up on me already. So it was fine.
So you snapped and moved to South America.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So then when I moved here, people are like, well, at least that's not as bad as Colombia.
Yeah, okay. I bet that was a culture shock to not only go down there, but then come back. It's like, wow. I mean, things change in the Bay Area, housing prices and, probably 100 more coffee shops open since you left.
For sure. And when I come back to visit my friends in San Francisco or wherever, it sort of blows my mind how different it was than it was 10 years ago even.
Yeah.
But obviously Brian and I are from Truckee.
Okay.
So obviously Northern California has a special place in our hearts. Our third business partners from Iowa. So none of us are actually native Oregonians, but we all love Oregon for all of the reasons that everybody else from California keeps moving here. So.
Yeah. Oregon rules, man.
That just outed me. I never tell people I'm from California.
We got a huge scoop right here. I really appreciate that. Thank you. That's all we're after here anymore. I really basically just feel like anything north of Shasta is Northern California. Maybe until you get up to Seattle, and then that's the cutoff to Washington. Oregon is just Northern California.
Oh man, so many Oregonians are just rolling their eyes at you right now.
Yeah, I hope so. Because no, I love Oregon, man. Oregon is it is funny because when you talk about visiting another state like Oregon and you get the natives sort of afraid you're going to move there, it just reminds me of that don't come to Hawaii. Don't move to Hawaii because you're going to get beat up. And I feel like Oregon's sort of the same way, but
we're too nice to beat you up.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the opposite, but I don't know. Some of the people from Oregon I know are a little bit loopy. I'm just kidding. No, Oregon rules, man. I love it. It's a great place to visit. And we were talking before the show where now it's basically just like California, where it's hot as shit and on fire all the time. So it might as well just be absorbed into the state.
Those are fighting words, man.
Yeah, that's sort of what I do, though. The beer that I opened a little bit on the beginning of the show is Touch of Brett. It's a dry-hopped farmhouse ale aged in French oak barrels. Can you tell me a little bit about this beer as I pour it into my Mai Tai glass at the same time?
Yeah, definitely. So this is actually one of the, probably the closest thing, this and Rhino Suit are the closest things we have to flagships, where we brew them more than once. And this beer we brewed every year since we opened, and it's an awesome beer. So it's 100% Brettanomyces fermented Saison that's aged in French oak and then bottle conditioned, and it's always dry hopped at the end before bottle conditioning. And when we first did it, it was the first beer we released. We were fortunate enough to win gold at GABF for that very first beer we made, which was pretty dope. And
look at you guys, the Californians coming into Oregon and winning gold already.
Yeah, and then we kept making it, and we switched up the dry hop for a few years, and then we kind of just went back to the OG because we liked it so much. So this is dry hopped with Citra, and kind of going forward, we're just going to be dry hopping with Citra on this. But it's definitely a very it's kind of the gateway beer to barrel aged beers, we feel like, because it's very, it's not super acidic. It's the Brett level is not. I mean, it's 100% Brett fermented, so it's not. There's not no Brett, obviously, but the way that we ferment our Brett really, really harnesses kind of the tropical aspects of Brett, and then as opposed to like the super funky barnyardy. And it's kind of the hoppiest beer we make it, but like, I don't know, 20 IBUs or something. But
I love it.
This is kind of our gateway for people that are like, oh, I love IPAs. What should we drink? And then we hand them this. But it's a fun beer that we've done over and over again, and it's I don't know, done well for us.
It's super food friendly too, I think, which is really awesome. You can put it with a lot of different things. And to give a little bit of our roles here, Brian kind of runs production here, and so he's probably a little more modest about this stuff. But this beer has won 4 out of 5 years at GABF. It's won a medal.
Wow.
So we're pretty proud of it.
I would be too. That's God. That's a whole show right there on that topic specifically, because that is an incredibly hard thing to do, obviously. And, I know you're not making beer specifically to win awards, but it is nice to be rewarded with an award on what you're doing, especially in a place like GABF.
Yeah,
that's
for
tough,
sure.
man. Congrats on that, you guys. That's really
very humbling.
That's very impressive. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's also like, as we were talking about just a minute ago, how everything's getting hotter. All of our beers are kind of a sense of terroir of where we are in Eugene and kind of our place. And this Touch of Brett this year's is a little more acidic than previous years. And that's really just 100% due to our cellar is hotter and our bottle conditioning room is hotter than it ever has been in the past. So like souring bacteria is able to kind of kick in a little more. So it's really interesting that, when I say we make this every year, and same with our Rhino Suit beer or a couple of our other beers that we reproduce, we're not trying to make the exact same beer every time. It's more of like the vintage approach. So it's like this Touch of Brett's going to be different than the next year, is going to be different than the next year. And this one is really kind of what stands out in my mind as being like, oh, wow, it was really hot when we were bottle conditioning this beer.
Is this
really hot when we were cellaring this beer?
Is this like a marker for things to come? Are you sort of like, oh, you're touching cloth right now? Like what, like if this beer is different because it's hotter, how is everything going to shift? And how are you going to be approaching that?
Yeah, I think more so as we're like, looking at intervening and getting some temperature control in our warehouse.
Right. Okay.
That we don't have now. So it's crazy. It's just, this year has been, we had, I don't know, 10 days or something over 100 this summer, which we just never get in Eugene. And it was just like our warehouse in town where our bottling line is and our cages are where we bottle condition our beer is just a super rudimentary, like not insulated warehouse. And, when the beers were bottle conditioning, they got way hotter than they normally would. So, we're kind of looking at transitioning to, moving facilities and getting some temperature control and things that we never had to think about before because that wasn't an issue.
Yeah. You were just on autopilot. And then now the environment decides to make you work a little bit harder.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. You said a little bit, Brian, about how you ferment your Brett to drive specific characters. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I hang out with a handful of winemakers and they all roll their eyes at me because I love Brettanomyces. Yeah. Or American winemakers, I should say. And
right.
The biggest thing is that if you find Brettanomyces in wine, that's the most stressed out that yeast will ever be because it's just a high alcohol environment. It's an acidic environment and it's super, super low cell count. So Brettanomyces in wine is really like Band-Aidy to me and very like really far on the funk, like not even funk, but just kind of not great spectrum. Yeah. And basically to come off with these really tropical and citrus forward flavors, you do the opposite of that. So it's you have really healthy yeast that you pitch during primary fermentation at very, very high pitch rates. So we're pitching at like above lager pitch rates for these. You ferment at a cool-ish temperature for Brett. I mean, we're fermenting at like 66 degrees. And then you're really kind of giving it everything it needs to thrive as a yeast strain. So you're seeing like the best of Brett as opposed to just like it's struggling to survive and creating all these kind of gnarly off flavors, which, those, I shouldn't be so harsh with those off flavors. Like some of those things you kind of expect in lambic beers or lambic inspired beers. You expect kind of that funky barnyard hay type aromas and flavors. But for our primary fermented beers that are 100% Brett, it's like we want just like the best that Brett can be, if you will. And that's just like kind of treating it like you would a normal brewer's yeast, and it really comes off tropical and citrus forward, which we really enjoy. Okay, yeah, interesting, because when we were still learning about using Brett in beers, especially on the homebrew level, it was stress them out. Right. Underpitch, stress it out, really drive those flavors, but you're saying, you get more funk than tropical. You get more farmhouse than tropical, and the hay and that light hay honey thing and whatever, and that's there a little bit, but there is that tropical fruit, green guava kind of a thing happening here that is very different, and that's because you're using it as an ale yeast, basically. I mean, that's totally. Yeah. Okay.
And when we talk about like how much we love this beer as kind of a gateway beer for people, so many of our customers are not super beer nerds that are looking for a really like intense, funky Brett ferment. There's people that are like enjoying our experience. They're intrigued by kind of this higher end packaging, this higher end product, and this may be their first experience with any sort of mixed culture beer. And so I don't know that they're always going to love some of those kind of more intense Brett flavors, right? Whether it's kind of like the diesel or the Band-Aid or like the intense barnyard. And so this one is really intended to be very food friendly and very kind of approachable for a lot of palates.
That surprises me, I guess, because knowing you're from Eugene and Oregon in general, I just sort of assume that every customer at every brewery in Oregon is just high on the spectrum of beer nerds, where they're just like, they're looking for the exact thing you're offering and whatever. And I don't know what it is, but I have to remember that that's not the case, that there are still new people coming into beer. I'm sort of like, it's like that thing where like, it's hard for people to listen to music that they, after like high school, where you're always listening back to the same music you sort of like listened to before. It's sort of like that with people entering the beer scene. For me, it's like, oh, I forget that there's actually new people who don't know anything, who are just looking for a new type of beer to brew or to
we're in wine country, and we get a ton of crossover from wineries and wine consumers who like food and wine and higher end experiences, and they'll come in and they'll be like, we love the vibe here. Like, what is it that you're presenting for us? They're like, oh, I'm not normally a beer drinker. But when you can put something in front of them that you're like, oh, this has like a white wine level acidity and it's got some fruit character, and they're like, oh, crazy, this is beer. And you can kind of like introduce somebody to something new. And for us, it's never been about being like this super extreme niche, like we're only targeting people who are really into beer. It's been about like, how many people can we introduce to a really awesome product?
I want to add on that in Oregon, the beer scene has, like, because we grow some of the best hops in the country, the beer scene here has been super, super hop forward. So there was a lot of time where it was like, you know, if you don't drink IPAs, and of course we all remember IPAs 10, 15 years ago, we're like, oh, how bitter can we get this thing?
Yeah.
So a lot of beer that people had were like, they had Bud Light and they had super, super hoppy West Coast IPA. And they're like, oh, from those two data points, we don't like beer. Mm-hmm. And so we get a ton of people in and that are just like, oh, we don't like beer. And then we give them one of our sour fruit beers or something like that. And they're like, whoa, I had no idea that beer could taste like this. And because, you know, we make great IPAs in the Northwest, but almost to a fault, where we're like, oh, what, you don't like IPA? Then that means you don't like beer. So we're kind of that. I don't know, the amount of people that come in the tasting room that are just like stoked that they have something and they've never tasted those flavor profiles before.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. Because I mean, as good as IPA is for the economy of craft beer, it is sort of like you said, one person's data point of beer. This is beer, I don't like it.
Right, this is craft beer, and then American Light Lager is not craft beer, and I don't like either of those. So therefore, I don't like any beer.
Yeah, and that's the hard part about going to beer bars, is because they have to make money. And so, you know, you have 17 taps and 14 are IPAs, and then the rest are hazy IPAs. And you're like, well, I don't know. Or like, here's a 7% porter. You're like, well, that's not really going to do it for me. So give me my Dr. Pepper. No ice. And yeah, so I don't know. It's weird, man. The business of craft beer is definitely weird. But the cool part is there's something for everybody. You just have to go and find it sometimes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, which is why I love doing shows like this that aren't really just here's our pale ale and here's our porter or whatever. It's they're different. It sort of reminds you of the canvas, the palette of flavors that beer actually has.
Yeah,
I love it. Yeah, so I appreciate you guys being on the show and talking about that.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
I tell you what, let's just open another beer. What do you think of that? How about you were saying Stone Fruit Symphony?
Yeah.
Let me find that. Tell me a little bit about that while I dig through my cooler here.
So a lot of our, I don't know, we try super hard to really just align ourselves with awesome people doing awesome things in their craft, right? So we have, this beer has some peaches that were grown just a few miles north of our brewery by some friends of ours. And then it's also, the nectarines came from the Hood River area, but it was via a local company that is called Organically Grown Company that really is like a farmer-owned cooperative that really helps organic farmers come and like really get their stuff to market. So it's we try really hard to focus with local farmers, and we're spoiled that we can do that in the Willamette Valley. And this beer is just a testament to that these are two awesome fruit varietals that we grow very well here in the Willamette Valley and we can get from our friends. But kind of to paint a really broad brush with our fruit beers, all of our beers, I'll get kind of into the production side. All of our beers are primary fermented in stainless steel, where we pitch our mixed culture. It's in stainless steel for about a month, and then it goes down into oak for 3 or 4 months. And then our fruit beers get that 3 or 4 month old beer goes back onto fruit, re-ferments on that fruit, and then goes back into barrel to finish maturing before it's blended in bottle condition. So, these beers are, over a year to be very general in production wise. And this is it's kind of one of those things that's all hands on deck. We actually just got pluots, nectarines, and peaches yesterday that kind of all hands on deck tomorrow. We're all going to be cutting and de-pitting and throwing into our fooders
that sounds fun.
On. So it's kind of a team building, if you will.
Yep. Building your next day at work. Yeah. You want to be here tomorrow? Come stone fruit or de-stone fruit.
But there's a big difference, right? Like you smell this beer and it smells like fresh stone fruit, right? This doesn't smell like somebody dumped something out of a bag into a fermenter.
No,
it's a like ripe whole stone fruit thing, and you can really taste the difference and smell the difference. And we believe pretty strongly that fruit matters. I think this is something that like every winemaker will tell you that fruit is a big deal. And in the beer industry, a lot of people are like, well, yeah, you got raspberries, right? And you're like, well, were they good raspberries? Were they shitty raspberries? Were they whole raspberries? Like, does it?
Right. What was the sugar content? What was the acid level? What was like all those things that we really care about?
And it's like, no, they were just raspberries. And this, you're like, wait a minute.
They were just raspberries. Yeah, well, right. And you know what? And that's a good point about you need to know the acid level. As we all know, shopping, raspberries or even blueberries. I mean, you know, blueberries, they don't really taste like much, but you can either have like an overripe blueberry or just a shitty blueberry or one that's really good. Same with cherries or whatever. So what are you putting in your beer? So do you guys test the acidity and treat it like a wine, I would imagine. At that point,
so the more techie farmers that we work with will I'll work directly with them. So next door is King State Winery, which is one of the biggest wineries in Oregon, and they are fully biodynamic and do a ton of really cool farming practices. But in addition to growing grapes, they grow a handful of other things. And speaking of blueberries, we just got blueberries in a few weeks ago.
Nice.
And because they're set up with the wine with their wine process lab, we get like TA and sugars and tannin levels and nitrogen levels from them.
Wow.
So that really helps us like dial in the harvest. And we'll like, because we can work with them so directly, it's like, hey, let's harvest the fruit at this point, and then we wait and we harvest it at that point. And that's definitely spoils us for the fruit that we get from them.
Yeah, for sure.
On the other side of on the other side of things, like the small farmers, a lot of it is just on pallet, right? So it's like they would normally pick it super early, underripe, to go to the market so that all the shipping and everything happens, and then it sits on the market of choice counter, or the Safeway counter or whatever, and then it ripens there so you can take it home a month after it's picked. So the local farmers here, we can work with them and be like, look, let's get it like pretty ripe, sugar levels pretty high before we pick it, because we'll go into beer the next day. And then on the when we're working with people that are a little further away, that I don't have the luxury of just like going there and tasting it firsthand, what we'll do is we'll have it come in-house, and then we'll lay them out in their bins and wait until they ripen to the level that we want.
Okay.
Before we put them into the beer.
Yeah,
so it's still very like, no matter how we get them or no matter how we work with the farmer, we'd be like, know that we can get the fruit to a certain level before we want to use it in the beer.
You are spoiled.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that something you guys, do you think that you would have stumbled upon or a practice that you would have implemented had you not been in the Willamette Valley in wine country like that? Like if you were in Truckee? Do you think that you would be like super like
in Truckee? That definitely would not have been the case. But
yeah,
we can make an IPA.
Okay, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's just like, I mean, that's why I love it here so much. Like I left Truckee, came to U of O in Eugene, and then got my degree in chemistry. And actually, the class that stuck with me the most, and I'm still like one of like three professors I'm still in contact with at U of O, is the urban farm professor. That like, it was this like agriculture class and learning about, obviously everything agriculture, and that's why I love it in Eugene so much, is because we have such a cool food scene where pretty much everyone has a garden in their backyard and they're growing their own food. They're canning their own food.
Yeah.
We have an awesome restaurant scene that uses all of these like great small organic producers of fruits and vegetables. And we're able to and everyone loves the craft and everyone's super stoked on it. And we all know we're not getting rich doing it, but we all like helping each other out. So it's this really cool vibe that we have here. And that's why I'm here. And that's why I drug Doug from South America up here to do this. So
you were the one who put him back together.
Yeah.
And brought him whole up to the, back to, I don't know.
Right. So it was, that's a huge plus of being here. And I mean, it's like, my backyard is full of vegetables right now. And this is like the most exciting time at the brewery, because we're like, okay, what fruit's coming in now? What fruit comes in now? It's like blueberries were a couple weeks ago and stone fruits this week. And then in a couple of weeks, we have all the wine grape beer, or wine grapes. And we're like, this is just such a cool, like, vibrant side of the brewing industry where we're really going off agriculture at its core. Because before that, it's like, sure, we're an agricultural product, but we're buying mass produced grain in sacks, and when we're lucky, we can go meet our hop growers. And in the Northwest, we're spoiled to do that as well, where we go meet our hop growers and can like pick hop lots and things like that. But brewing has gone away for the most part from being like a truly agricultural product. It really excites me to kind of get back to that point where we can work with local growers, and it's really a sense of place for us, right? It's like, this is Stone Fruit Symphony is stone fruit that grew in the Willamette Valley in 2020. Like that's what it is. And it's never going to be like that again. It's going to be different each year, but that's what it is. And it's really exciting to be able to showcase that.
Yeah. The aroma from the peaches and the nectarines they're blended really well, because you get the peach underneath. And, for me, like, peaches are, I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but like, they're a darker stone fruit aromatics than nectarines. Nectarines are sort of like lighter and more acidic smelling. Don't question it. Just that's how my brain works right now. But it's like, I get the nectarines, but the peaches still carry underneath, and then you get some of that malt, I think, underneath as well. All of that, and it's just this great structure for all these aromatics. And Doug, you're right. This is very much like just a fresh, like cracking open a fresh peach and then rubbing it with a nectarine and then smelling that. Because everyone does that, I imagine. You take two and you make one, and that's how you.
Yeah, that's what I do every time I go into the grocery store.
Sir, what are you doing? I'm rubbing on my peach and my nectarine together. Please give me some space. This is a very private moment. Yeah, it's great, man. And then that acidity comes through. It's very bright smelling sour beer. Yeah, this is one of these beers that I could just sit and sniff all day long. The aromatic is great.
Talking to people about like how things pair with food, and you imagine that with like some sort of a soft cheese, and you're like, man, that would be so refreshing on like a hot summer day. And I don't know, it's just like, it's pretty fun to start to bring that food element into the beer world, because so much of it has been ignored on that side.
You know what I fully appreciate about this beer, and I think, and forgive me, I was so excited, I forgot to even talk about the touch of Brett, but we can always go back to it. Is the sort of depth of character that your beers have. Sometimes you get Brett beers or sour beers or, mixed culture fermentations where they're sort of linear. But these, I haven't noticed that. There is a dynamic to it. There is a complexity to it. And then even though through the malt, like the malt will carry through after the fruit, and everything sort of blends together at the end, and then it's bright and acidic and it's gone. I still get a little peachy nectarine thing, but the beer just is very refreshingly finished. It stays behind a little bit, but not much. And it's not overly complex. It's not complicated, which I don't think that's what you want. You don't want to overcomplicate things for your consumer, but it's a very, very approachable fruited sour beer. I really like this beer a lot.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things too, and I don't know if this is kind of what you were meaning or not, but so much of what we see in the beer industry with a lot of beers right now is like very one-dimensional. Like, I am trying to like make you a peach beer, and so all you are going to taste is peaches.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want is a balance of peaches and acidity and malt character and yeast character and like the whole package. And so trying to be balanced with everything, where people will take another sip and be like, oh, I tasted something I didn't taste last time. And then they take another sip and they're like, man, I really want another glass of this. Like, to us, that's super important. Like, if we fill up your glass and you have one taste and you're like, that's amazing, but I don't want another sip. Like,
right. Checked it in. I'm done.
We failed. Like,
checked it in.
Like, that's not the goal.
Sure.
Yeah. It's so much like just another element of what Doug said is just like so many beers are just hit you over the head. And then there's like, oh man, this is so sour, or this is, and as most sour beer breweries, we've gone through that like, oh, our beers aren't very sour. And then we went too sour and now we've kind of come back. And for us, it's just like, I don't know, every beer that we make is just, we focus so much to quote Budweiser on drinkability. And it's like, it's like our beers are in 500 ml bottles. Like, yeah, that's 2 8-ounce pours for you and your friend, or 16 ounces to yourself. And I want you to be able to drink the 16 ounces to yourself, because it's like, you're not going to get, the enamel ripped off your teeth, or you're not going to have so much sugar in one of our stouts that, you're going to have diabetes after drinking it. So it's like,
yeah, for sure. Like I don't want a hole to be eaten through my stomach and then it just comes out
right
afterwards.
Right.
And I mean, either one of these, I would be totally content drinking by myself. They're great. Yeah, they're really good. Yeah. So you said that you sort of went too sour and then you came back. How do you pull back from the acidity and the sourness and sort of bring it back in line? How do you even make that call?
So what's really interesting is actually I'm in the weeds so much that I don't notice a lot of the big picture things. And that's what's great to have Doug on board here, is because he can come through and kind of get me out of the weeds.
Okay. Yep.
But there was like, I don't know, a few years back when we were kind of growing a bit, and all of a sudden our beer started tasting way better and better. Doug was like, hey, do you think this is because we have way more beer in our cellar that we can blend with? And it was just kind of that's exactly why. Mm-hmm. Like we have, now that instead of, and that's kind of what separates us from other breweries too, is that are just doing wild beers or barrel aged beers on the side, is that, we've got, during the seasons, the most of our spirits program is like 300 casks. And in our wild program, there's over 200 casks. And it's like,
wow,
we have a lot to choose from when we want to come up with a blend. And that has really, really made our beer better. And, I guess being able to go through and, all of us, and now our team has gotten bigger. We have Huck and who's like lead cellarman, and then Joe's our new lead brewer, and Matt, our third business partner, was the founding brewmaster. He's brewmaster at Oakshire, and now he started with us. And we all get together and we come up with these blends, and it's like, it's really nice to have some too sour beer in the cellar that we can blend in to up acidity, or we have some super mild Brett Saison that we can up into like lower acidity and build mouthfeel. So it's really just like having more colors on our palette and a bigger cellar that we can work with. And I was so much just being like in the weeds, like, oh yeah, our beer is getting better and better. And Doug's like, yeah, it's because we have more beer in the cellar.
but it's a huge thing, right? Like I don't want to say every, but like so many small breweries dabble in barrel aging, right? I don't want to say we're the only people doing this, because we're certainly not.
Sure.
But one of the big advantages we have is that when we go in to make a blend, we've got 300 casks to choose from, and we can guide that the way that we want to have some consistency, where if you're like, well, this is our once a year anniversary beer, and so we filled 4 wine barrels with our sour beer, and we're going to see how it turns out. Like sometimes it's going to be really good, and sometimes it's not, but you have no control over it at that point because there's nothing else you can do. And so for us, it's like, we're super fortunate now that we have, again, we're a tiny brewery. I think we did like 500 beer barrels of beer last year, but in terms of barrel aged beer, that's like kind of a lot. And so to be able to like go through your cellar and have casks that you can be like, cool, like Brian said, we're going to throw in some Saison here and like up the mouthfeel and the body and reduce the acidity. Like being able to kind of redirect a little bit after the fact is super important to making a balanced beer.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good card to play when you're building a beer. Let's take a break real fast. We'll come back and we'll drink some more beers. So hang on, everybody. It's the session. We're here with the boys from Alesong up in Eugene, Oregon. We're going to be popping more corks here on the session. We'll be right back.
You're tuned into the session.
Because life's too short to listen to crappy radio.
All right, thanks for sticking around, everybody. We are back with the boys from Alesong up in Eugene, Oregon. And Brian, we were talking a little bit before we came back during the break. Our friend Barry from Lucky Envelope was commending you on your MBAA, which I believe is the Master Brewers Association.
Yep.
Something like that. About your talk on barrel-aged beers. And you were saying that was a very intimidating and sort of humbling experience. What was that like?
Yeah, it was really cool because, a ton of the people that I've idealized in the industry and locally were out there like listening to me give a talk about what we make. And it was just, I don't know, very humbling. And I really got the idea to start this project listening to Paul Arney give a talk on barrel-aged beer at NBAA.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like he was just speaking to me the whole time because I guess before this in college, I had I kind of scammed my way into an internship for credit at Oakshire Brewing here in Eugene.
There you go.
And that's where I met Matt, our third business partner.
Okay.
He was the brewmaster there, and I was getting my degree in chemistry and kind of approached them being like, hey, I could do some like analytics for you guys. Let's maybe I'll start a quality program, whatever. And it was like, as Matt likes to put it, like the craft beer bug kind of bit me, and I was just like done forever that this is what I wanted to do.
Okay, nice.
And after college, I continued working there as their quality control manager, and then started to run their cellar. And then Matt, he's from the Midwest, and he brewed at Flossmoor Station, among others. He's going to get mad at me that I don't remember everywhere that he brewed, but Flossmoor Station was the big one.
All right.
Where he won Small Brewer of the Year at GABF. And
nice.
him and Todd Ashman were kind of the first guys to like really put beer in barrels.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a barrel program at Oakshire, and I helped him do that. And it was always kind of like nights and weekends. We would like have enough space in the production brewery to make barrel-aged beer. And otherwise I was just constantly checking seams on cans of IPA and making sure that like all our full distribution beers there were up to standards. And at this MBAA talk, Paul Arney was just like, from Ale Apothecary, he was formerly at Deschutes, and he was basically giving this talk about like, I think his tagline was art over industry. And it was like, you get sick of making the same, it's not corporate beer, right? Kind of, because we're not AB InBev, but you get sick of making the same beer over and over again. Like let's get back to our roots of agriculture and just like the craft of all these things. And I felt like he was just speaking to me the whole time at this MBA meeting.
He was.
And it was shortly after that I was like, you know what, we got to do this. I talked Doug into coming back from South America to helping us. And then I talked Matt into leaving his very good and safe position as brewmaster at Oakshire to come do this as well. And it was just kind of a full circle thing to be able to be at MBAA giving a similar talk that Paul Arney did that convinced me to leave to start Alesong.
Was Paul in the audience by chance?
Probably not, knowing Paul.
Just sitting back there, and then you're done, and he starts slow clapping.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Paul's good. His beers are great. We had him on a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
His beers are fantastic. Yeah. All right, I'm going to crack open the Terroir project, spontaneously fermented sour ale with Pinot Noir grapes. What is this? Because you guys, the Willamette Valley is the Pinot. That's what you guys are sort of known for. Is it Pinot or is it Petit Syrah?
Pinot, for sure.
Pinot. Okay, all right. I get those two confused in my head all the time. Yeah, Willamette Valley Classic. So tell me a little bit about the Terroir project, please.
Yeah, I mean, so this is like Firestone Walker organizes kind of a multi-brewery collab every year, where they've invited, I don't know, a dozen breweries that do mixed culture beers and kind of co-ferments with wine grapes to do this project that they call the Terroir Project, because it's really about showcasing the terroir of where you're from. And for those of you who aren't from a snobby wine background like I am, the terroir is like capturing the time and the place and the soil and really the character of that moment and that place. And so the way that this collaboration is set up, and there's a festival every fall, or at least there used to be until last fall. But there's a festival every year where these dozen breweries or so all come together and showcase the terroir of their brewery and their area with these beers. But basically, everybody makes the same base beer, and that has to be 51% of the fermentables. And then 49% of the fermentables come from wine grapes grown within, I think, 100 miles of your brewery. We didn't really struggle with the distance at all. I think some of the guys, Jester King in Texas has a little bit harder time finding a nearby winery.
Yeah.
But we literally have one that's like 100 feet away, so we could go there, but we had so many to choose from. And this year, the one that you have in front of you, we made with one of our kind kind of closest partners in the wine industry, Antiquum Farm. They're all, it's just like an amazing farm to winery. It's grazing based agriculture where they kind of operate, and, they rotate the different livestock through their vineyard. When they need to kind of turn over the soil, they let the pigs come in and they root around and turn over the soil. And then when they need to fertilize a little bit, the chickens come in, and I don't know all the details on it, but they make some amazing wine and amazing grapes. And so these are the grapes that we used in this one. Brian spent a little bit of time actually working on the production side in the wine industry before we started Alesong, to get a little bit of background about the way wineries do a lot of production, treat barrels, and all of the other things that breweries are still learning.
Okay. Yeah.
And so he can probably tell you a little bit more about the way we treated the fruit, but this is like, as much wine as it is beer. And it's just like a super cool kind of like mind fuck to some degree of like, what am I drinking here?
Yeah, it really is, man. It's like a carbonated sangria. I mean, not on that flavor level, but it is like, am I drinking wine? Am I drinking watered down wine? Am I what am I doing?
Yeah, there's some cool sparkling reds from Argentina that are similar, but that's a digression. The other thing too is that we've made so Matt and I started making wine beers at Oakshire with some Mueller Thurgau grapes, and I don't know, 8 years ago.
Yeah,
and that was kind of our first foray into making wine beers, and that was probably the moment in beer making that I was like, I'm in. This is it. And that just like really grabbed me as like the cool flavors you could get from fermenting wine grapes or grape juice, and what they could do to beer. And so we've made a ton of wine grape beers, both at some at Oakshire and then a ton here at Alesong. And we're really just like, I don't know, Doug always gives me a hard time. He always is like, yeah, you wish you were a winemaker, but I think maybe a little. But yeah.
I mean, it is sort of like I don't know. It's like when a brewer walks in versus like a winemaker. It's almost like a winemaker's like when Fabio walks in. The hair is instantly blowing, and the chiseled jaw. It's basically just like Doug, yeah. And it's like, but like beer makers, like, well, I got my Dickies work shirt on, and I'm just here for some fucking fish and chips. But it is, so I know what you're talking about, yeah.
But so we've done a ton of cool great beers with Cab Sauv grown in Washington, Horsehead Hills area. Obviously, a ton of Pinot Noir from around here, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay. We've done Muscat. And they all just lend super cool characters to beer. And the Antiquum is just north of us here in Eugene. They're in Junction City, and they are like probably one of the coolest farm wineries I've ever seen. And I really got introduced to them when I was working at King Estate on the production team there, and we were buying a ton of fruit from all over the valley because they were King Estate's one of the biggest wineries in Oregon, or the biggest winery in Oregon. And they're next door to us at our brewery. And it was probably like 2-3 weeks after all the Pinot Noir in the state had come in. We got these 6 bins of fruit from this random farm called Antiquum that I had never heard of and close to here. And it was just like, it looked like California Pinot. I mean, it was dark red. It was just like vibrant. And there was just nothing wrong with the fruit that you could ever see there. I mean, there was no bacteria problems. There was no insect problems. There's nothing. I was just like, what on earth is this amazing fruit that just came in?
Perfect fruit dropped down from the heavens, man.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And then throughout the process of making that wine, it was just like, it really stood out in the cellar. Everything stood out so different than anything people grew here in Oregon. Wow. And I was just kind of like, I need to meet these guys. This is awesome.
Yeah.
And as Doug said, they're all grazing based viticulture, which is like, it's, speaks to me too, as getting back to the roots of agriculture. I mean, they do everything totally different than any winery. Their goats are running free through their vineyard. Their pigs are, I mean, it's just really intimate space of figuring out like what's the best way to treat grapes in our area, and how can we do that using the least amount of mechanics and chemistry as possible.
Yeah.
And they've come up with this program that's just fantastic. And when we got invited to do the terroir project, that was like the first one that came to mind. It was like, these guys, they're the definition of terroir of the Willamette Valley. This is the coolest thing we can do.
So we partnered with them, and they're great friends, and we've done some cool dinners with them where, that's one of our favorite things. Just a little aside is to do a pairing dinners where we have like a beer and a wine for each course, and then there's like the competition of what paired better, the wine or the beer.
Yeah, for sure. That's cool.
Usually the beer carbonation gives us gets us over the finish line usually.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in making these specifically red grape red wine beer hybrids is we treat this exactly like you would treat a wine. I mean, it's in an open fermenter. We do punch downs on the cap, so as the beer ferments, it pushes all the grapes to the surface, and then you punch that down so it doesn't go anaerobic. You do that until it's dry. This is after a cold soak, and we're treating it exactly like we would treat a Pinot Noir, except it's 51%, malt fermentables as opposed to all grape fermentables. So and then we bottle condition it and serve it cold and carbonated. But it's cool, very cool process.
Do you sulfite it first, or were you sort of going for like the natural fermentation?
Yeah, so this was all spontaneous on this, and all of our fruit beers for that matter are, we rinse off as many bugs as we can, and we rinse off, we try to get as many leaves and things out as we can, but it's really just we want the native flora that's on the fruit, any fruit that we use to impact the beer.
Okay. Yeah, this is a like Doug said, this is a sort of a mindfucky beer.
Yeah,
because it's like it's a wine, and then it changes. It changes constantly, and I think Doug, you even brought that up on the last segment where your beers, you can pull different stuff at different times depending on either how long it sits, or a little bit maybe how warm it's getting, or just in your palate, the way your palate shifts from sip to sip. Your beers sort of do shift and change a little bit. Things do come to the forefront and then pull back a little bit. And I wouldn't say things are fighting; they're not competing to come out, but they just it is sort of like this tide. It's like rolling tide of flavors.
Yeah,
this is a weird beer because I've had wine beers before that sort of are like, I don't know, it's like just tastes like oxidized wine, and you put fucking beer in it. Like, I don't really care, but it doesn't taste like that at all.
And I think, again, like I made this point earlier, but the fruit matters.
Yeah.
You're not like, oh, we just got some Pinot Noir grapes. It's like, no, we got really good Pinot Noir grapes, and yes, they were expensive, but it's
incredibly expensive.
It's totally worth it, right?
Yeah.
Like, it makes a big difference to have good fruit.
Yeah. Well, and Willamette Valley Pinot is great. It's expensive. There's a reason for it. I like the sort of farm-based wineries too. I mean, we've had a lot of the showroom wineries before, especially in California, especially in Napa Valley, but I'm sure you guys had your fill in Oregon too. And
yeah, definitely.
There are a couple of little holdouts, little standouts of they're just more farms with grapes, or or grapes with farms, but that symbiotic relationship between the animals and the earth, and sort of getting hippy dippy here a little bit, but like and just how all that sort of connects. And I think if you're caring for animals and you're caring for the grapes, those things sort of go together somehow. I don't really figure it out. It's magic. I don't know what it is.
I think it's just the mindset of the grower, right? If the grower is like, I really want to focus on like how these things play together, and like let's harness the best thing that comes off the land, as opposed to just like forcing it via chemicals or whatever. It's just going to create a better product because they're more passionate about growing the fruit and making the wine than they are about, let's maximize the tons per acre that we can get on this and all that side. So it's just a totally different mindset. It's
like process. I think maybe to bastardize something you just said, it was like process over profit.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Or whatever
our industry, the poly.
There you go. Yeah. Whatever. It's fine. Yeah, for sure. And if you're thinking about your process and how to clean, and this goes to home brewing too. I mean, probably especially. But if you're thinking about your process and how clean you are, and and the enjoyment, but just how everything works together, rather than winning a competition, right, you're going to have a better time, and I think you're going to produce a better beer. And the same thing goes for sour projects, for wine, for anything that you're making, for food. All that matters. Your process matters, and it just matters.
Right, and it's deciding whether to make a beer like on the homebrew level? Do I want to make a beer that hits the style guideline of BJCP exactly, or do I want to make the beer that I want to drink? And it's like that's the difference. Is you're like, you're going to be way more stoked on the other thing.
Yes, and if you make a beer that you want to drink and you enter it in competitions, that is your excuse when you fucking lose. Is to say, well, at least I like it. And that's my problem. I go, well, look, I'm making my oatmeal stout. It tastes more like a fucking brown porter. I don't care. I like it. That's why I haven't won. I mean, that's just it. It's not.
Yeah, it's not in category.
Yeah, it's fine. And you wedge it in there somehow. Yeah, this is a rad beer, man. I really, I almost feel like I'm incorrect calling it a beer. It rides that line very, very well between wine and beer. It really does. It's how do people like this? How does your consumer base react to something like this? I almost feel like it's, a little bit of like farting in church in the wine country where you're like, what? Carbonated beer, wine beer thing? What is this?
I think this is one of those things that when somebody comes into our tasting room and says they don't like beer, they only like wine, we'll give them this. And they'll be like, oh, wait, this is beer? Okay, what else do you have?
I feel like that's cruel, but I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also, this was a smaller beer. It mostly went to our beer club. In fact, it might have even been like exclusively for our beer club. But you get a chance to present it with the full story. And I think we had a dinner, Brian referenced, where we had both a couple of people from Antiquum down, and they're talking about their story, and we're talking about what went into this beer. And when you present it and people understand everything that goes into it, and then they're tasting it, it's like a totally different experience, where I think sometimes a beer like this might be hard to just pull off the shelf at the grocery store. Like, you wouldn't really know what you'd be like, what is this? Like, what did I buy? Like, I don't get it. Where like, if you're like, for us, one of the benefits of having a club and like being able to present the beers to people is like, they get it. Right. Mm-hmm. They know everything that went into it, and they totally get to experience the whole story. And then when they taste it, it makes sense instead of being confused.
Right.
And
yeah.
So that's why it was actually super popular. It's been one of our most popular sort of club offerings. People were like, that beer's amazing. Like, I love it. It pairs with anything that red wine pairs with. And like, it's super cool.
And what's cool is we had, as I said, we had the winemaker and the vineyard manager out to our dinner, and they got to speak to our club, and they brought the wine that was made with the same grapes from the same block.
Wow.
So you could try the wine side by side with the beer, and it was just like,
dude, that's cool.
It's that story, and that's what's so important to us that Doug already said. It's like, if I bought this at Safeway, I'd be like, what? Fuck, what's going on? But because we can tell the story and have each of these pieces put together for our club, it's like, it makes it a just way better experience overall.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. And I'm getting a lot of the barrel off the side of the glass too. That oak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. What a trippy beer, dude. I hate to even like move on. I still got a bunch of my glass, but like. So anyway, about this.
I want to say that it's the Rare Barrel that like all of their wine beers are called like blurred. And I just feel like that's such a great characterization for this beer. It's like, it's definitely like blurred line here. Like, what am I drinking? Is it beer? Is it wine? Is it something even better?
Yeah. Well, actually, I found a glass sort of shaped like yours. It's the Rare Barrel Ambassador Sour glass. So there you go. Now I'm glad that you guys aren't a warring faction, and I can stop hiding the label.
It is the beer industry. There's very few warring factions.
Yeah, I know. That's why I thought it was funny. Especially those guys, too. Like, Jay and Alex I don't think they can get angry. They just get sleepy. They just, whoa, hey, 10 o'clock and all is well. Yeah, fantastic beer. That was really good. I really appreciate that. I don't know why I'm going through puberty right now, but it's really good, guys. All right, what's the next beer I should crack open here?
Or are we going to try to make it through all six? Or
yeah, hell yeah.
Hell yeah. All right, then let's go. Let's go Cherry Parliament next.
Let's do it. Yeah, I like to try to make it through all six. These are the times when I'm a little disappointed that it's only me. You know what I mean?
It's also like, again, our wild and sour beers are all, bone dry, so they're high alcohol, and then our bourbon barrel aged beers that we're getting into are high alcohol. So,
it's a good thing I'm not driving because I'm just at my house. But like, you know what I mean? It's like, it feels like these are the times I feel bad. The pandemic and whatever, and it's just like we have to have something to talk about. But on the other hand, I want to be able to share these with people because they're beers to share. I can't drink them all tonight.
Yeah, exactly. Or you could. You might call in sick to work tomorrow, but you could.
Yeah, for sure, man. I got to work tomorrow night too. It's the shitty thing about working for yourself, man. You just can't get fired. Okay, this is Cherry Parliament. Sour red ale aged with cherries in wine and bourbon barrels. Oh man, I feel like I'm in trouble here. Tell me a little bit about Cherry Parliament, please.
Yeah, so this is an interesting beer. Its name comes from just as simply as P-Funk was on the radio when we were blending this beer, so it's called Parliament.
Fuck, I love that. That's just the most simple origin story in the entire universe.
Yeah, Parliament Funkadelic all the way.
Yeah.
But
well, that's also like Touch of Brett was the first beer we ever bottled. And we're like, shoot, we need to come up with a name for this because it was like literally the night before the first release or whatever that we're like staying up way too late and like whatever. As always, you're like behind the eight ball on this stuff, and it was Touch of Grey, Grateful Dead on the radio, which is a song that everybody loves in Eugene for sure.
Yeah.
Brian especially, a huge Grateful Dead fan. And he's like, well, why don't we just call it Touch of Brett? And we're like, sure, that sounds good. And then you win a gold medal at GABF, and you're like, maybe we should have thought through that name a little harder, made sure it was something that we wanted to like continue.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
Like, now it's stuck. Like we're never going away from that name.
Can't do it, man. You can't do it.
So this beer is pretty fun. So kind of a challenge that we have talked about, Matt and I had always talked about, was like, how do you get roasts, malt character, and sour beer without having it be super astringent? Because generally when a beer really dries out, it's like that roast bitterness comes through astringent. I don't know, it's hard to do. And I'm not saying that we nailed it here. I think there's, in all of our beers, we have room to grow. But it's been a fun process. And this is a beer that we probably touch more than any of our other beers. So this is, our red ale that we primary ferment in stainless with our mixed culture. It goes down into French oak for over a year. We found that our red beers take much longer to kind of mature than our blonde based beers do. Then it went on to fresh cherries from Hood River, fermented on those, went back into French oak until it was ready, and then we wanted to add some body with this beer, so it went into actually second use bourbon barrels that were that held our barley wine beforehand. So it's unrinsed bourbon barrel aged barley wine barrels that then this went into for just a couple of months before packaging to kind of round out the acid and to give it a little more body. And in general, I think American oak, or I shouldn't just say all American oak, but I think that bourbon barrels are not the greatest to age sour beer in because they add so much oxygen, just the way that they're built.
Really? Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So bourbon barrels are very crudely put together because a bourbon distillery is like, we're going to use this thing once and that's it. So it's, if next time anybody who's listening is at a brewery, and they see bourbon barrels, it's like, you'll notice none of the staves overlap really. They're just kind of jammed together. And,
they are, yes.
Like Frankenstein barrel. And then you look at a winery in French oak and they're all like very clean, like they're cut specifically for each other. And it's very nice and tight. Whereas, so by nature, bourbon barrels just let in a ton more oxygen than wine barrels do. So it tends towards acetic character in sour beers, I think. So just like kind of the touch at the end of kind of the second use bourbon character with some of the barley wine character that was in the barrels before that, just makes this a really, kind of interesting, complex beer that we make. But yeah, complex.
Yeah, right. And I'm having a hard time describing this beer, and you and I both describe this beer for a living now. This is very complicated. God, that aroma! I don't know what it is about your beers, man, but the aromas I'm just infatuated with. In and of themselves, they are a whole different enjoyable experience, and this is no different. The cherries, I mean, you sort of get like wine coming through, maybe a little bit of the bourbon, I guess. I don't really know, especially just in the aroma. I feel like I'm going to get carbon dioxide poisoning or whatever. I'm just going to pass out from just snorting the gas in here. But God, that smells amazing. It smells like almost like a rich chocolate bar, but not really, but like a chocolate wine cordial. I don't know. Maybe that's
there's definitely a chocolatey note. So we just released this beer last weekend, and we always do food pairings with our beer releases, and this was paired with a chocolate, like a bittersweet chocolate ice cream, because we thought that like that chocolate note was worth playing up. I mean, it's definitely like an interesting element of kind of the chocolate, sour, cherry, like all the malt in there, I think distinguishes it from a lot of our other fruited sour beers. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. What a amazingly smelling beer. And I don't want to say it's balanced, because it's not balanced. It's very tart. But in a good way. You get some wine tannin, some wine. I'm going to say wine acidity, and I don't necessarily know if that's what I mean, but that's what I'm going to go with. That combines with the tartness. There's, I could probably pull a little bourbon out, sort of like buried deep in the mid palate there. But I think it works really well to sort of balance that bright, that acidity, out. You definitely get a wine component in the aftertaste, and the cherries are all there basically all the way through. Yeah, I don't think you could like construct a beer on purpose much more complex than this. You know what I mean? If you took all the pieces and like made a Lego set of the beer flavor wheel or whatever, sure. I don't think you could really, it seems impossible. It seems like this is just sort of like its own thing that happens within the barrel, and this is what it is. It seems like, I guess I don't really know what I'm saying. It feels like you couldn't replicate this, because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of layers, and it's like the last beer, the Terroir Project. It's sort of like ebbs and flows with the flavorings.
Yeah, there's a handful of beers that we make that I wish that I could get every person that ever drank the beer to like walk through the process with me. And I have such a different experience, because I'm like tasting the beer from start to finish, right? And this is one of those examples, and our Creek actually is another one that we released a few releases ago, but it's similar, where it's like you taste it, and then you taste it before it was aged in the second use bourbon barrels, and you taste it after, and you're like so distinctly like that is what rounded it out. That is what did this. It's not like, it's tough because it's not, we're not imparting a ton of bourbon flavor, which is what you normally do when you add a beer to bourbon barrels. But it was like, okay, the beer beforehand was really angular and sharp, and then the beer afterwards was more rounded and had a little bit more body. And it's one of those things that same thing, before it had the cherries on it, you add the cherry element, then you add the second use bourbon element, and then you add the bottle conditioning element, which always kind of like elevates these beers. It's really just like such a cool journey throughout that I wish that I could just have everybody like it came in a little pack that's like, this is what it tastes like first. This is what happened after I did this. This is what happened after I did this.
You should do a little podcast.
Yeah, there we go.
Like for every release, I'm like a podcast advocate, but like, especially for breweries, for like every release that you do, you just do a little 15, 20 minute thing or whatever. And there you go. Tasting notes. So they can taste it with you. Yeah.
So it was one of those beers that it just like kind of all came together at the end. And it was like, I don't know. It's a complex beer. Like if you had to describe it in 2 words, I don't think you could.
You really can. It's like, chocolate without the sweetness, and also cherries without the sweetness, and acid. Like, but that doesn't do it justice.
Right.
No, what a tremendous beer, man. I'm really impressed with it. I can honestly say I've never had anything like this beer.
Nice.
So was this part of the club stuff as well, or is this for just, the plebes too?
This one was distributed throughout the Northwest. It'll be a little bit in California, Nevada, kind of around.
Are you guys primarily in Oregon, or?
That's the majority of it,
yeah.
But we have sold a little bit to a lot of places as somewhat of a niche brewery. We have been sought out by a handful of kind of random importers, and so we sell beer, a little bit of beer in Asia, a little bit in Europe, kind of random states on the East Coast. So kind of little drops here and there. The way that probably Rare Barrel does, or Cascade, or some of these other kind of more niche small producers.
I imagine you have, like you said, random people just hitting you up for, cases here and there, whatever. That's got to be still a cool feeling. I mean, your beer is halfway across the world.
It's very cool. Like I got to go to a festival in Norway a couple times, which was awesome.
Nice.
And like dude. We went to London Craft Beer Fest. There's been
being able to go to like Hunahpu Day and some of that is like pretty awesome. I mean, you get the invite, or like even just to like Firestone Walker's Terroir Project. It's like a huge honor to be a part of that, right? And so you like some of these. It's like, wow, this is really cool. Somebody across the world heard of our beer and thinks it's good enough that they want to bring us to a festival. Yeah, for sure. Like, let's go to Norway for this festival. Is it profitable? No way, but it's awesome.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like I've always heard Jamil talk about at Heretic, where it's like, I can go to this festival in Norway or Singapore, but I'm never distributing in Singapore. So there's no benefit for me other than just having a cool experience and connecting with people. And I think that's the whole point of craft beer, I think, is the connection with people and sort of figuring out how other people taste. And then you guys can sort of like compare notes and whatever. And like that's that cultural experience, that communal experience that we're all sort of fighting for still.
Yeah. It's generally really inspiring too, because you go to a random place, whether it's another brewery in Oregon or another brewery in California or China. We haven't been to China yet, but our beer's in China. But
nice.
You go to any of these festivals and talk to the brewers, and you're like, it's cool that we're all like, we have this common thread this through line that's like kind of bonds us, that we're these craft beverage producers.
Yeah.
But then you just come back and you're super inspired because you're like, oh man, they did this way differently and they do this differently. And I had this flavor profile there that I've never had before. Or like we're at this restaurant and we had this food that was crazy. Let's like figure out how to meld those flavors with something. So it's just like, I don't know, just you got to get out of your bubble and you got to get out of your cellar palate and just like
that's true.
Experience as much as you can. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, we're going to take our very last break. We're going to come back. We have 2 beers to get through. I'm looking at the descriptions now. I'm a little nervous, but I'm going to try to get through both of them because they sound delicious, and that's what we're all about here. So hang on, everybody. It's The Session. We're on with Alesong, and we'll be right back.
Segmented, demented, fermented.
It's The Session.
Hey, thanks for hanging around, everybody. It's The Session. We are winding things up, but before we do, we have 2 high-alcohol beers to drink, and by we, of course, I mean myself, and maybe my cat. I don't know. We'll see. Just don't call the animal shelter on me or whatever. Boys, what should I drink first, the Maestro or the Breakfast Suit?
We should probably do the Maestro first.
Maestro.
Brian and I both still have to drive, so we're probably going to have small amounts of this before we move on. But
okay,
but it's okay because we're professionals.
Yeah, cowards, but that's okay. It's fine. I'm kidding. Classic blunder. I don't have an opener in here.
Well, I know we spoiled you with some cork.
You really did, yeah. So hang on, let me go grab a thing here. I got my my trusty opener. So tell me a little bit about the Maestro, please.
First, I want to tell you about our top, the closure on top. So we used to wax dip all these bottles.
Oh God, yeah.
And we switched to these heat shrink PVC capsules. Mainly because we get like a ton of our club members would come up to us every release and be like, "What's the trick to opening wax? Like, I hate wax. It sucks. It's awful."
It really does.
And we're all kind of like,
Well, we had we prided ourselves on very thin wax too that you could get in with just an opener and be fine. But we caved to switch to these heat shrinks capsules because we think they look great, but B, the bonus of it is that it makes production way easier. We're not hand dipping all our wax anymore, which is awesome. But
yeah, I mean,
all we ever heard was like super negative about wax. And then we switched to this, and then all we heard was like, "But I love wax."
Oh,
how dare you?
Yeah, you're never going to please everybody. I remember like at working at Morby years ago when we were getting into like wax dipping stuff on the wine side, and like the wax we got was like super easy to break apart. You can almost like pull it in a string, but it smelled like old cheese.
Oh, sure.
So that was real weird. Yeah, and then I don't know, wax is just weird. There is something cool and tactile about like pulling the wax apart. But I personally much prefer the heat shrink because I could just pop it off with the top. I don't, the top comes off, it separates easy. It's fine. It's great. I love it.
Yeah. I love the wax, and I didn't think it was that hard to get open, but we had so much feedback from people that were like, "We can't open your bottles." And they're like, all right.
Yeah, it's not hard except when it is. It's like one of those things where it's either like on or off. It's like easy to come off, or it just breaks apart and it's brittle, and then it's weird and it gets under your thumbnail.
And it gets in the bottle, and then it's
yeah, man, yeah. So.
I think somebody who gets frustrated and takes their knife to it and then cuts themselves, and you're like, "Whoa, why are you doing that?"
Yeah, it's like, calm down, everybody. All right, Maestro barley wine ale aged in bourbon barrels. It's a 13% beer for your boy here. Damn.
Yeah. So we make this beer every other year, I'd say, and it's just we still like bourbon barrel aged barley wines, but it's really fun because most bourbon barrel aged beers these days, and ours too, Rhino Suit that we'll taste next is like very chocolate forward, very vanilla forward, and it's cool just to go back to the barley wines that are just super caramel forward and just kind of classic. So this is our bourbon barrel aged barley wine,
and it's English style, so this is not the like hoppy, bitter American style barley wine. It's very smooth. It's very much like a you're sipping on brandy or bourbon or something. It's kind of like one of my favorites to drink in the wintertime. Kind of just sitting there watching the rain come down and sipping on this.
I smelled it in my glass, and it brought me back to and this is I apologize as a crossover, but it brought me back to the first and only time I visited a Hair of the Dog.
Nice.
And it's just that it was like brew day, and it's that mash smell, and there's English style, like kind of old ale, aromatics in the air, and like it just instantly brought me back to that weird ass gravel, like industrial park vibe, man. It's that is such a good. I don't know what you guys are doing there, but the aromatics in your beers really. It's like a loudspeaker for what is in the glass, and consistently across the board. And I feel that's very hard to do. What you smell is a representation of what's in the glass. And I know that seems not counter to it, but it seems obvious, but it's not always that way. Not every beer sort of showcases what you're about to taste in the aromatics. There's some of it, but yours are so complex. I'm going to ask you if you know why. And I know there's no answer to it, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Why do you think that is?
I think they're like, obviously like the process, right? Our average beer takes 18 months to make, right? None of those beers were kettle soured. None of these are just something that we cranked out as quickly as possible in stainless. I think on the bourbon barrel aged side, we're super fortunate. Our third business partner had a ton of experience as a pub brewer, working kind of super early on in the like bourbon barrel aging days. And his recipes, it's like 57 specialty malts. So this is like a very malt forward beer.
Yeah.
But like tons of complexity from it's like, okay, and we're going to add like a half a bag of this. And like, he just like, has a really great palate for some of these like bigger malt forward beers on the hot side. And I think people sometimes characterize barrel-aged breweries. They want to characterize you as like, oh, you're that sour beer brewery, or like, oh, you're that bourbon barrel-aged brewery. And we're kind of like all of the above. And I think people, have seen the model where it's like, oh, it's all about blending and the base beer doesn't matter. But we're big believers that actually, no, the base beer does matter. The malt matters. Like brewing the wort matters. Like all those things go into a complex balanced beer. It's not just what happens in the cellar. So it's a little bit of everything. And I think I feel very fortunate to have ended up in this partnership with kind of both Matt, who had so much hot side experience, and Brian, who's like really locked in on the cellar, on the cold side, to kind of like hold this all together. And you end up having, pretty consistent complex beers kind of across the spectrum, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, I think the other, on top of that, and it is funny, like whenever a brewer sees a mash bill that Matt comes up with, especially for Rhino Soup, this beer is actually pretty simple for one of Matt's recipes. I think it only has a handful of malts, but Rhino Soup, yeah, it's like, I don't know, 15 malts or something.
Good Lord.
But it's the kitchen sink, if you will. But the, it comes back to like, because we focus on barrel aging, because that's all we do, we're able to like leverage relationships that other breweries can't only have. Like when we order bourbon barrels at a truckload, we can be like, hey, throw a handful of these in, throw a handful of these in, throw a handful of these in, and we can go through and we can really pick out like the barrels that we like the best and statistically like the best from year to year to year. So it really gives us an opportunity to like really dial in the flavor profile that we like, because we have the room and the headspace to experiment with this, as opposed to, when I was working for an IPA brewery, it was like, okay, that's just a side project that you do. Like you don't, spend a ton of money or a ton of time on that. And this is like, we've trialed the bourbon barrels that we like. And it's funny because Heaven Hill is the barrel that we like the best, but it's also like the whiskey that I would never buy, right? Like most Heaven Hill whiskey barrels are Evan Williams. And, I don't gravitate towards Evan Williams when I'm at the liquor store.
Right.
But then we go through and like Basil Hayden is my favorite bourbon, and we got Basil Hayden barrels in, and we're just like, oh man, this makes terrible bourbon barrel aged beer.
Does it really? Why? Because Basil Hayden is fucking rad.
It's great. Yeah, but it's super subtle. It doesn't really come through in the beer. And then you have Heaven Hill that's just kind of like, when we work with other purveyors, like when we work with guys that here in town that roast cocoa nibs or import vanilla or coffee roasters, for example, they're always like, what are the nuanced flavors that you want for all these things? And when we're looking for an adjunct, and especially for bourbon barrels, it's like, we want bourbon flavor. And it turns out that Heaven Hill is bourbon flavor. and it's like, the barrels are reliable. They're generally well treated for all these things that like we've gone through a ton of other distilleries that aren't that case. And it's like, when we want coffee, it's like, we want coffee flavored coffee. We don't need blueberry flavor in our coffee, because if we wanted blueberries, we'd add blueberries. Or whatever. So it's just like the more consistent kind of, bourbon flavor. And Evan Williams seems to like, or at Heaven Hill seems to like just fill that niche that we need.
That's super interesting because I would have just assumed that like Basil Hayden or Blanton's or something like that, right? Like the bourbons and the whiskeys that you like to drink would clearly be the choice.
Yeah, we were all disappointed. We all had our horses in the race. I was like rooting for the Woodford, and then it was like the worst one on the table.
Really? Wow, that's a good Woodford pun too, because they're the bourbon of the Kentucky Derby.
Exactly.
There's so many directions I want to go with this beer, and it's hard for me to pick one. I get a this might sound weird, but I get a banana bread, like a ripe banana with like a cinnamon thing, not in a bad way, because usually we'll talk about banana esters as like, oh, you have a funky Hefeweizen or whatever, but it's not like that. It's such a unique animal. It's such a unique experience to be tasting this beer because it works so entirely. It's like overdone banana bread. And I don't know why I'm getting that, but it's like when you get the sugars that caramelize sort of on the outside of the crust of the bread, like the heel of the bread. I don't know if I'm talking just to myself.
I'm laughing. We're both laughing because we were doing a collaboration with Deschutes that's coming out soon.
Nice.
It's a Belgian dark strong and several other things, Asian spirits barrels. But we're sitting there in the tasting, and I look at Doug, and I'm just like, "Doesn't this taste like Mom's banana bread?" And then Doug's like, "Yeah, it does." And then Ben, the assistant brewmaster over there that's in charge of the barrel program, was like, "Well, my mom's banana bread tastes different." So,
so he's like recording notes on the whiteboard, and he's like, "Coombs banana bread."
Yeah, fair enough. Like with chocolate chips.
We get that. Yeah, we get that. But I think with this is like, and I think it's because so our imperial milk stout that we do, Rhino Suit, and then variations on Rhino Suit, which we'll taste next, is so just your classic like stout flavors, chocolate, vanilla, roast. And we do that a ton. And then this barley wine we do every couple of years. And then we also do a Scotch ale every couple of years. And we really like try to make these like a big difference between the two, where it's like Rhino Suit is this chocolate forward, this roast forward beer, and Maestro and Kentucky Kilt, our Scotch ale and bourbon barrels, are like, you know, we're trying to find the other elements of the bourbon barrel character that we can get, which is like the spice, the kind of caramel, the brown sugar aspect, like almost, you know, all the kind of nuances that you lose in like a big stout come through in these beers. And, you know, part of that, of course, is the malt bill, right? Where we're using just like really good malts that come through as biscuity almost, but just you know, the brown sugar-esque and caramel-esque, but as opposed to just like the kind of hit you over the head with the like coffee, chocolate, vanilla side. So it's a cool aspect of just like the bourbon character that comes through, as well as the base beer. That's just like a really good dichotomy of like what bourbon barrel aged beers can be between Rhino Suit and then the Maestro, which is our barley wine.
Yeah, and you know, I appreciate that it's more of the English focus, that it's not super big, because a lot of the flavors that you get in there, I think, would sort of be munched up by the sort of darker classic, you know, American barley wine flavors. It's subtle. It's great. It's great beer.
And it's big enough too that this is one of the beers that I'd say that most of our beers, we age for you, so you should drink them, you know, right, relatively soon after getting them, because we think that's when they taste best.
Yeah.
But this is one of those beers that is just like, you open this month after month, it's like 6 months, year after year, and it's just like, it's better and better. This is definitely a cellarable, really fun beer to see how it evolves.
I could see that. How do you keep your clean beer separate from your, you know, your Brett beers and your sour beers and stuff like that? Is that a challenge in the brewery, or is there a separate facility across the parking lot or whatever?
Yeah, so it's about 20 miles away.
Oh, is it really? Okay, great. Is that far enough away? I don't know.
But I mean, there's an asterisk for that, because we share fermentation vessels. And so we share a packaging line.
Okay.
But when we go through and we're transitioning a stainless steel vessel from a wild ferment to a quote unquote clean ferment.
Okay.
It's like an all day CIP, where normally in a normal production brewery, it's like a 2-hour CIP, right? To transition between beers, but it's an all day thing. It's like every soft part gets boiled or replaced.
Wow.
The tank gets steamed, so it gets up to 185 degrees. It's just a whole process. Like if you worked with, you know, we have a very small team. It's me, Matt on the hot side, and then Joe and Huck in the cellar. And if anybody worked with Brett, they're like not touching clean beers that day.
Wow. That day. Damn.
It's like steam is our best friend, like hot, you know, heat treatment is our best friend. So that's the biggest thing. But the actual storage and cellaring of the beers in barrels, it's like all the wild beers stay out on our countryside property, and all the, again, quote unquote clean. I hate the word clean. I wish we could come up with a better word. Clean.
Why? Why do you hate clean?
Because that infers that the opposite is dirty. And I don't know. I just don't.
Okay. Well, you know what? I think I get it, because of the way that you're doing your Brett. You're treating you're pitching it as like a lager rate pitching, and you're treating it like that's just the yeast instead of I'm contaminating my beer with this thing.
Right.
I get it. Okay. I get it. Your brain worms are now in my head, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, great success. But the barrels, when they're aging for the months and months, are in a warehouse in town. That's several miles away.
Okay.
But when we first started, it was all in the same warehouse, and when we gave our tour, we always tongue in cheek said that there was a what do we say? Like there's an invisible micro barrier that kept all the bread on one side, and the sack on the other side.
And they were like, "Oh man!" I mean, early on, I forget who it was. I want to say it was Vinny, but I don't think that's true. But like early on, when we were doing these shows, we would have a brewer. Oh God, I wish I knew who it was. I want to maybe it's even Michael Ferguson. Anyways, who was like, whenever I'm like wineries in the area, and I have friends who are winemakers, they know that I'm working with Brett, and they won't let me in their winery. They won't let me in the barrel room. Just because they're that like cautious of like the transfer of bacteria.
We've definitely been told by the guys at King Estate, who is 100 feet away, that we have to drive 20 miles back to town, shower, and change our clothes before we could come up the hill and like go in their winery.
Are they serious? Like it's
he's like, we do this again tomorrow morning. You come here first.
Okay.
And then
damn.
Yeah, it's always the joke. I always get a phone call. I mean, Brettanomyces is like, it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
It's just in the air. It's everywhere. It's on the fruit skins, especially. But so no matter what winery you are, you're going to get like a couple of infected barrels, no matter what. And whenever this happens at the winery next door, I'm the first one that they called. They're like, "What did you do?" They're joking, but they're just like, "It's your fault. I know it's your fault."
Oh man, you were over here. I saw the cameras.
Yeah.
Senor Rhino. What is this beer? So I have it on my notes as a breakfast suit.
Yeah, so that we sent you a different beer than our notes are.
Oh, okay. All right, good. I just want to make sure that I'm...
That was an accident then.
Right.
Somebody who filled out the form, maybe me, might have messed it up. So Senor Rhino is a variant of our Rhino Suit series. So Rhino Suit is our Imperial Milk Stout aged in bourbon barrels. It's actually one of our investors, who is a winemaker in Sonoma. When we were sitting down to get some investment from him, he was giving us a piece of advice, and he was talking about the best thing he's learned as a businessman was that you have to put on your Rhino suit. And we're like, what are you talking about? And so he told us there's a whole long build up to the story, but basically he's like, when you are a businessman, people just put wall after wall after wall in front of you, and when they do that, you need to go back in your office, put on your Rhino suit. You know what a rhino looks like? It's got the big fucking horns and the shoulders and everything. And you come out there and you just charge through that wall. And we're all like sitting there and we're kind of like, okay. But we walked out of the meeting and we're like, that's the first beer name that we have in our cellar. And it's stuck. This is a big beer, but it's a pretty smooth beer. So it's got like a little bit of lactose in it. So it's got just like that hint of sweetness. This is not overly cloying, but that little bit of sweetness makes it so much smoother. I mean, the way that bourbon is smoother than Scotch, just like really like makes it drinkable. Aged in bourbon barrels. The one that you're drinking is the Senor Rhino, which is our Mexican hot chocolate variant. So ancho chilies, cocoa nibs, cinnamon, and vanilla. And that, I think, was a bronze medal at GABF. But just really like a cool beer, blending all those flavors together on top of the really chocolatey base of the Rhino suit.
I get like a pipe tobacco in a way that I've never had before. And it seemed, look, I'm being honest. I'm not trying to blow smoke. It just is happening. Okay. We're like,
we'll take it. Keep it coming.
Yeah. Like you just, you say, oh, pipe tobacco, or I've talked about this before, where you sort of have in your dictionary, your lexicon or whatever, of like different descriptors, and you use this and use that and whatever. It's sort of like the way awesome or I'm blown away, or literally these words don't really mean anything anymore. We just use them. So we say pipe tobacco sometimes in beer where it's like, oh yeah, sort of kind of like hints of pipe. This is fucking pipe tobacco. Like if you put it under my nose, I would think, okay, this is like a what's that? Major Dickinson. No, that's a coffee. Anyway, some blend of just like a deep, sweet pipe tobacco thing that's within the chocolate, and it sort of smells like Mexican hot chocolate, the abuelita, I think it is, or whatever. And then the chili. Wow, this is weird.
It's like a very small hint of chili. I think one of the things with chili beers is that it builds on you over time. So you like really don't want to overdo it on the first sip, because you want people to finish their glass and not be on fire.
Right. Yeah, cinnamon. There's cinnamon in here, right? I'm not just making that up.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Cinnamon. Yeah. See, this is okay. Now I don't like you guys, because this is another beer that the aromas are changing every time. I mean, I'm obviously kidding, because I think that's cool, but it's very hard to do. I think. I mean, the amount of beers that I smell and taste in a year, it's like these are standing out in this category specifically because of how blended or well done that they are.
I think that goes back to like the fact that we don't want our beer to be one dimensional. We don't want our beer to be so like we don't want our imperial stouts and bourbon barrels to just be hot and sweet. And that's like the way the trend is going. We don't want our sour beers to just be sour with fruit. Man. So it's so important to us that our beers are drinkable and balanced. And what that ends up doing is that the beer just evolves through the glass, because there's not one flavor just like super overpowering all the other flavors. So this beer is super interesting because cinnamon is one of those things that's like one of the spices that we've worked with that just like ebbs and flows so much. And when we first packaged the beer, the cinnamon wasn't there. And I wrote in my notes, like, not enough cinnamon. We need to redo this. And then like 3 weeks later, when we released it, after we packaged it, it was like way too much cinnamon. Okay. And I wrote in my notes, back off cinnamon. This is not enough. And then now when you drink it, it's like, oh, it's just this like layer of complexity that goes in, and I think it's fine. Right. And the same with the cocoa nibs and the ancho chilies. It's just like, we want you to taste each of those elements without one of them just like beating you over the head with it.
Yes. And that's exactly what I taste. I mean, if any, I don't know. I think sometimes I maybe go a little bit overboard, but I'm serious. If any beer can make me shut up, it would be this beer, because there's so much going on. And it is, like you said, it's not one pokes out. It all sort of combines, but they get equal chances. Some sticks out, some doesn't. You get the cinnamon, you get the cocoa underneath. The vanilla sort of like, pokes out here and there. The chili is underriding, underneath, and that helps combine with the cinnamon to sort of bring that up. But then you also get the ancho chili sort of smokiness. It's wild. It's wild. How long have you been making the Rhino soup beers? Since the beginning, it sounds like.
But that was actually like the very first beer we brewed. Touch of Brett was the first one we blended. And so Rhino Soup was the very first one we brewed. It was like right at like the second we got our TTB license, we were making a stout for bourbon barrels.
Wow.
What's cool with this beer is that it's by itself, it's an absolutely delicious beer. And it holds its own, of course, but it's also a really good palate, or what am I looking for? A really good just canvas. That's the word I'm looking for.
Okay, yeah.
Canvas for all these other adjuncts that we can use on it. So we often make this beer and then we'll do small variants of the final blend with other adjuncts, whether it's vanilla, whether it's chocolate, whether it's the Señor that you had, the Mexican hot chocolate, or coconut, or whatever. And it's just a really fun thing for us to do with our club, and just the way we release our beers. So we release all of our beers are available to our club. We release beer 4 times a year, and Doug can speak more to this, but we release our beers 4 times a year. There's 4 or 5 beers per release. A couple of each release goes to distribution, and the rest is club and tasting room only. And it's just like a really cool way. The club is a really cool way to experiment with people that are bought in. And again, we're not putting out like bad beers to them by any means, but it's just like, as we talked about with the Antiquum beer, and then with some of our other adjunct beers, it's just like, hey, these guys get Alesong and they get what we're about. So we can do this like kind of weird thing and get their feedback on it and then if we want, transition that to a wholesale batch.
And they're going to listen to the whole story, right? Like they're going to get it before they make a judgment. So that's like really fun for us to have that almost as like our pilot system, right? To know that you have people who are bought in and they're like, cool, we're really excited to hear the whole story. And then we'll try it and be like, wow, this is amazing.
Right. See, and this is where your podcast comes in. So once a quarter before the shipment, you record, you do the tasting, and then you send it in the email link, and then people listen to it, or whatever.
We do little videos for each beer.
Okay, all right, good.
Actually, you got a little QR code on the back there.
No way.
You can scan and watch a little video about each beer after the show.
No, I'm going to do it right now. We're going to sit in silence while I figure out my phone. I don't really understand it still.
As long as it's not one that I'm doing, because I hate the sound of my own voice.
That's cool. Think about the podcast. I'm telling you. Mike in the chat says, does the club ship to California? Which is the same question I have now.
Yes. So we don't directly, but we do through Tabor, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard of. But basically, they have partnered with us, and we essentially do a shipment to them every quarter, and then they can get it to all of the states that they ship to, which is something like 30 states or something. Pretty good. And they handle the logistics on that. Unfortunately, laws are a little weird in this country.
Yeah, they really are, man.
Yeah,
it's very frustrating.
It's really cool. So it's once a quarter, and our out-of-state members that can't come to all the releases, although we'd encourage you. Bay Area is just a quick 7-hour drive away.
Yeah, yeah, something like that.
4 times a year. But
hey, Southwest just started Eugene to Oakland direct.
Yeah, Eugene to Oakland direct.
Really interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so that's for all of our club members in the Bay Area. But it's a 8-bottle shipment to our out-of-state members, and it's this one we released 4 beers, so it was 2 of each. And it's otherwise we always prioritize the smaller volume ones to our club. So if we have a beer that's doesn't make it anywhere else, the club gets more bottles of that than anybody else. So it'd be like 3 or 4 bottles of that would go to the club. And it's just it's a fun thing, and we have benefits at our tasting room. Our countryside wine tasting room has been set up so we do guided tasting, so we can really walk people through our beers and then suggest food pairings, and sometimes we pair food with those, and then club members can just show up anytime they want and just enjoy the patio or whatever. And then we have another tasting room in Eugene that club members still get their discount at. So it's like we really we really prioritize our club members. They're so important to us, they're so bought in.
Yeah.
And I think Doug and I have both been part of wine clubs that have just burned us, where it's like, oh, we have this wine that we can't sell, so we'll just unload it on our wine club. And we definitely try to not do that, and are really conscious about oh, this one the club's going to really like. Let's prioritize this to the club. And you can also switch and transition things. So it's a fun thing that not many brewers are doing.
Yeah, no, that sounds really cool. And then Ben now is going, what about to Australia?
Well, that's a bit of a stretch, but we did send some beer to Australia. I think it was probably pre-COVID, so
it's probably been a while.
So some of it is probably still tasting really good, and some of it is probably sold out.
Oh man, well there you go, Ben. You poke around the very small country of Australia. I'm sure you'll find it.
Yeah, there's a random bottle shop that has some rando seed in it, I'm sure.
Absolutely, man. Those are the best. Well, boys, I'm going to let you go, man. I really appreciate the time and the hang, and especially the beers. This was really great. Where can people go to find more information about Alesong beers?
So alesongbrewing.com is our website. As you saw, there's a little bit of a video that explains a little bit about what we do, although 2 hours in, these guys probably know more than they need to know. So Instagram is at Alesong Brewing. Facebook, I think, is the same. Twitter is the same. So follow us there, and
great.
And come visit us in Eugene. That's definitely the best way. I mean, our facility in wine country is absolutely stunning.
Awesome. Very good. Brian, Doug, thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and thank you everybody for listening. Thank you everybody for joining us live on Facebook. If you want to join us live on Facebook, be sure to follow us on social media. And Kim over there will definitely direct you to the date and time that is most appropriate for you to come and hang out with everybody in the chat room. I also want to thank More Beer. You can go to morebeer.com for absolutely everything you need to make great beer at home. They're good people. They're trying to help you make good beer or mediocre beer if that's what you want. I don't know why. I mean, if you're anything like me and you brew a terrible home brew, you can still get your equipment from More Beer and your ingredients from More Beer and everything like that. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot for tuning in. And until next time, we'll see you later.
JP's an asshole. Justin's a nice guy and winning the race. JP does great as his charity case.